It is essential for any programmer to know when it is necessary to write a comment in the code and when it's better to avoid it. As well as in case one decides to write it, do it with the minimum possible words, straight to the point, and that helps other colleagues to know what is happening in very few seconds. In my opinion, there are two big mistakes in this field. The first is to believe that commenting on everything or almost everything is good, when in reality we are creating an excess of redundant information. The second is to think that the context is always enough to understand the code and that comments should never be written, giving rise to parts of the code whose cognitive difficulty is high enough to justify a comment that reduces site complexity. For this reason, I believe that, as Aristotle said, virtue lies in the middle ground. But before delving into this topic, we're going to review the basic and syntactic fundamentals of how to write comments in Dart, based on the effective Dart guide. In the documentation section, we can see a detailed explanation of how to write comments. This section explains that to write simple comments that we do not want to include in the generated documentation, for example, some explanations about what a line of code does within a method, we will use the double slash. While those comments that explain what a method does, or what a property is for, or what a class does, these three groups should be in a generated documentation, we will use the triple slash. It is important to note that, unlike other languages, the use of block comments is restricted only to blocks of code that we want to temporarily disable. The rest should always use line comments either with double slash or triple slash. In order to be able to generate high-quality documentation, the guide explains how the general structure of a comment block should be. This should contain a single line as a summary of what the code does, followed by a block of text where we can explain in a little more detail what we think is appropriate to explain. We are also recommended to provide a code example in case we see it necessary, as well as links to other components in the project or external resources that can help to better understand what we are analyzing. Another big difference between Dart and other languages is that while in other languages we will write a comment like this, in Dart it will be written like this. As you can see, it is preferred to include the parameters and other relevant data within the narrative of the comment itself, which helps the comment to be shorter and probably more didactic. In general, and from my point of view, I think that Dart's vision of how to write comments is quite elegant and efficient, and I invite you to take a look at the official guide to understand all its peculiarities. However, one thing is to know how to apply a guide to be able to write a comment with the format it should have, and another is to understand when a comment is necessary and when it's not. So now that we have seen the basic aspects of the syntax, let's see how we can determine which code should be commented and which not. The general rule to know if it's necessary to add a comment will be the following. In the event that a colleague saw this code, will they be able to understand in a general way what it's for just by seeing its description, parameters, or other nearby information in less than 5 seconds? If the answer is yes, adding a comment is probably unnecessary. Otherwise, I would advise you to either add a comment or refactor that code to make it easier to understand. Actually, I think that this last option is preferable to writing a comment. In my opinion, the code should be as short and concise as possible. Let's put this in practice. See if you can understand the following code block in less than 5 seconds. I think that quite likely you will not have needed even 2 seconds to understand it. This is a very clear example of when a comment like this is redundant and not necessary at all. Now look at the following block and try to understand it from the code. This function does a few things, and while I think you will have been able to understand each piece, I also think that one will probably need more than 5 seconds to understand it. For this reason, and since everything is an initialization operation, adding a brief explanatory comment at the beginning can be very useful. From here, everything is experience and common sense. If you have recently started programming, don't worry too much about this either. And if in doubt, I recommend adding a comment. I think this approach is better than doing nothing and driving the next guy crazy to see what's going on in that code. With a bit of good practice, trying to dismember the code as much as possible, it is quite achievable to be able to write self-explanatory code in most cases. However, for all those minor cases or complex algorithms where there is no way to simplify further, it is better to write a comment. If you have found this video useful, please leave a like and consider subscribing for more content related to Flutter and good programming practices. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.